learning about civics and government. So I think if you're ever going to miss school, it ought to be to come here, right? And not just listen, but also someday to participate as well. So very good.
And I did promise Andrew that he would get on television, so hopefully
very
the camera
has
swiveled around to see him.
Where's the camera angle? All right.
I'd also like to introduce my staff, Chief of Staff Charlotte Turkhurst, my energy advisors Michael Colvin and Sarah Kamens, and our executive assistants Julianne Banks and Josie Emilio. So those are my introductions.
Welcome to all of you.
So if I could, I'd like to just say a few things in introduction. So Senator Steinberg, honorable members of the Senate Rules Committee, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored and humbled to be here today. As you know, the state of California is facing great challenges at this time, and yet I think has great opportunities in the future. The economy, although improving, is still growing at a slow pace, and this presents hardships for the consumers across all the industries that the CPUC regulates. Despite this harsh economic climate, California continues, though, to make great progress at developing affordable clean energy and a clear path to a sustainable future. While I think that the CPUC can have an important role to play in promoting economic development generally, we are most critical in the implementation of our future policy vision for the utility sector. At its heart, the role of the CPUC is to protect consumers and the public at large, to promote safe and reliable utility service at just and reasonable rates. In this regard, I think our most urgent mission is to help rebuild the sense of trust that the public has in its utility service providers and in their government regulators, something which had been eroding over time and which was severely shaken by the events of San Bruno. After 25 years of working in the private sector, I became interested in public service at the PUC primarily because of my concern about what we're leaving for the next generation and my desire to help shape this future. I must say it's been a real pleasure and a great privilege to serve the people of California over the last 12 months. In short, I think I bring three things to the Commission. One, commercial experience. Two, an outsider's view. And three, a quantitative approach. My extensive experience in finance, banking, and operations means that I'm comfortable in dealing with complex and quantitative issues and in making long-term decisions based on assessing future trade-offs of risk under uncertainty. As Chief Operating Officer for Deutsche Bank Global Markets, I needed to find the balance between allowing enough autonomy to sales and trading staff so that they could compete, develop new products, win clients, and make money, while at the same time, I needed to set limits and enforce these limits so that their activities did not expose the bank to unnecessary risk. What I've realized since leaving the bank is that I was essentially an internal regulator, encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship while setting rules to ensure the right behavior and the right overall outcome. I've tried to bring these sets of skills and experience to bear on the issues facing the Commission. I've worked very hard over the last 12 months to address my lack of insider knowledge of the utility industry and of the intricacies of the legal and regulatory process, and I know I have much more to learn. My focus has been on energy issues and specifically on electricity. In addition to my fair share of cases involving water, telecom, and transportation, roughly two-thirds of my cases are in the area of energy. I see that my biggest policy cases and my highest priorities come in three areas. One, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, specifically the implementation of SB2. We're roughly a third of a way through having tackled the issues of RPS compliance targets, portfolio content categories, and renewable energy credits. We're about to issue decisions on compliance rules and feed-in tariffs, but also have considerable effort remaining on the thorny issue of cost containment. The second area is in energy efficiency. This is an extraordinarily important and yet exceptionally complex and contentious issue. We're about to issue a major proposed decision on how we transition these programs to generate new levels of energy savings. And then thirdly, resource adequacy. this proceeding at its heart is focused on ensuring that the utilities procure enough power in the near term so that we can keep the lights on. So I've been quite busy. In the last year, my office has authored more than a dozen significant decisions or resolutions relating to energy issues, and we have an additional 6 major policy decisions that will come before the Commission in the next couple of months. But rather than go on at length about what I think are important and interesting topics, I'll shut up now and give you the chance to ask me questions about what you think is most important to you. So in closing, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I've been truly blessed to work with such a fine and dedicated team, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn and to serve this great state. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I want to begin by asking you about one of those decisions, which is the Abengoa decision, because it is it's a great point of departure, because it allows us to explore how you balance competing priorities. In that decision, of course, the issue before the PUC was whether to approve a 25-year power purchase agreement between PG&E and Abengoa that would be part of course, meeting the RPS standard. And noteworthy in the decision was the fact that among the governors, Governor Brown's 3 new appointees to the Commission, there was a division. Commissioner Florio, in dissent, stated that I cannot in good conscience vote for such an expensive, really expensive renewable project, which was estimated to be at least $1.25 billion over market price. You and Commissioner Sandoval, among the new commissioners, voted for the project. And I'd like to understand your thought process, not only as it applies to this particular case, but how you balance the aggressive desire to increase our renewable portfolio standard versus the cost to ratepayers.
Right. That's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked that. My number one concern in all of in every issue that comes before me is safety, and I can talk about that. Second most important is cost. And third is attracting innovation and new capital into the sector. And to me, Abengoa was trading off points 2 and points
2 and 3. Right.
The issue with Abengoa was it was much more expensive than different technologies, different solar technologies. The issue with Abengoa was that it was a solar thermal plant, which means that it uses the sun's concentration rays to heat up fluid and to generate electricity in that way, as opposed to photovoltaic, which is just converting directly electricity from the sun's rays. The advantage that Abengoa had is that although it was more expensive than photovoltaic, and photovoltaic prices have been falling very dramatically over the last several years, so that they are now much cheaper than they were, say, 3 years ago. The advantage that solar thermal has is that it has a permanence to it, in that after the sun goes down, there's retained heat which can continue to generate electricity after sunset, which is really when the demand for electricity begins to ramp up. And also when clouds pass overhead during the course of the day, the electricity doesn't cut off. Again, the heat is retained, and so it's able to continue to generate electricity. So there's another attribute to Abengoa and to similar thermal plants that I think is not necessarily contained in the numbers that you quoted from Commissioner Florio. If you do an apples-to-apples comparison, you need to not just look at the price of photovoltaics, but you need to adjust that for this value of the incremental shifting of energy over time past sunset and when clouds pass.
And does that, when you do that, just again using this particular fact circumstance, is it over market price then, or is it at market price?
It's still expensive relative to the market price.
Okay.
And part of the issue then goes to issue 3, which is attracting innovation and capital into California. One of the issues that we faced in the RPS process is that it takes too long between the time that a contract is agreed and the time that it comes before the Commission for final agreement. In the case of Abengoa, if memory serves, it was something on the order of 2 to 3 years. And in that period, as I said, the price of photovoltaics fell dramatically. And at issue is it appropriate to look at the cost of a contract which was agreed several years ago versus the market at the time it occurred, or versus the market at the time you're looking to approve the contract? And to me, my concern is that if you do the latter, you're effectively moving the goalposts. You're saying, at the time this contract was agreed to, it was at market, but now the market has moved, and we're going to reject it on the grounds that we could do something cheaper. That is obviously something that works in your favor if prices are falling, but if you turn the situation around and prices are rising, you can see that you'll find in a situation where contracts will disappear and look to recontract at the higher price. So I think over the long term, and we're going to need to continue to procure energy for many years to come, we need to, I think, develop rules that are clear and consistent so that we do attract investors to come into California to develop these programs, and that they don't feel that the rules that they agreed to in a contract will change because there are delays when it comes time to approval at the PUC.
But there's a line somewhere you would agree. And in this instance, again, apples to apples, I don't know whether the number over market, well, you say was something significantly less than $1.25 billion. So for purposes of how you go about analyzing a given situation, because this isn't going to be the only such situation that you're going to be confronted with as we implement this law, is there a line? Is there a three-part test that you would suggest or develop?
Well, I think at the core of the issue is that it takes too long for these contracts to come before the Commission. And so what we are working on at the moment, and as I mentioned the 6 major decisions that we're working on, this is one of those. And this is reform of the RPS procurement process. In a nutshell, there are too many contracts that are being shortlisted. When companies look to buy power, they open a solicitation. Oftentimes we'll get many applicants. They'll choose a few of them, but they choose too many of them, and they let a number of them drag on in the queue for too long. The process itself is also highly idiosyncratic. It's a process where each individual contract has been negotiated. There is no standardization between the different utilities. And so the process for approving these contracts winds through the relatively limited staff of the PUC, and that takes just too long. So what I'm proposing to do in terms of reform is to make that program such that we have more standardization, we have clear guidelines in terms of review as to when contracts should be approved and should not be approved. I also am proposing that we have more transparency around the prices. I mean, one of the things that is frustrating here in our discussion is I can't talk to you about numbers. I mean, I'm a mathematician and economist. I can't mention numbers here because this is non-public, confidential information, the actual contracted rates. And as you may well know, that price will not become public until 3 years after the plant becomes in operation. So let's say it takes 2 or 3 years to build the plant. We won't know publicly the price of that contract until 6 years hence. And I think that's something which we need to address. And I think more transparency, more standardization will lead to, I think, a stronger market, more competition. And I think this line, which is perhaps too broad and too fuzzy, I think will become quite a bit clearer.
I may return to this subject before we're through, but let me turn it over to my colleague. We'll start on this side this time with Senator De Leon.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Farron, looking over your resume, You have a very rich and diverse banking experience, formerly the head of global, head of structuring an institutional client group, obviously Deutsche Bank in London, Salomon Brothers also in London, B of A also in London, as well as Westpac, I should say, Banking Corporation. Given that, your rich banking finance history and experience, you broach the subject of energy efficiency, and I'd like to broach the subject about energy efficiency and financing. In your view, what are the biggest obstacles, barriers that exist right now that's keeping potentially billions of dollars on the sidelines? I'm talking about capital equity investments in energy efficiency for California specifically.
Right. Well, I think you're right in terms of there's a huge opportunity in applying financing techniques to energy efficiency, and the critical issue is that I think for too long the energy efficiency programs of the state have focused on short-term measures, in particular light bulbs, which are relatively cheap and easy to distribute, and really I think significant savings can be made in terms of retrofitting existing buildings. The single biggest barrier to doing that is these are oftentimes very expensive exercises. You could spend on a house, easily $10,000 and up, and not many people have got access to that kind of capital for the savings that may pay back within even a few years. So the key to this is finding ways of marrying together the public capital that we use in the energy efficiency programs to attract private sector capital into the area. And there are a number of challenges with that. I think the biggest challenge is that there's no great history on the credit performance of energy efficiency loans in this space. Even though we know that the repayment of energy bills themselves is quite high because of the risk of shutoff. In the case of an outside financier looking at a loan which is generating savings in electricity which pay for the cost of the investment, they don't know how certain they are that they're going to be repaid, and so they tend to treat that credit risk on the same level as they would, say, a credit card, which attracts interest rates in the high teens. So I think the challenge is going to be in developing, I think there are two challenges as it relates to residential. One is there are some legal impediments to tying the non-repayment or the non-payment of the energy bill to the loan associated with the retrofit upgrades, and I think that's something which is not as much of an issue as it relates to commercial real estate, but in residential, I think that's going to be quite a thorny issue to try to get around. So that's the first issue. I think the second issue is developing enough of a record, enough of a history of performance for the loans to convince the markets that this is a big opportunity. Personally, I'm very optimistic that in time what we'll find in the energy efficiency loan world, that we'll find deep capital that comes into this in the same way that we do having capital coming into credit card loans and automobile loans and the like. The reason why those markets function is there's a long history, and statistically, banks can examine performance and can have a good sense of what their risk is. That history doesn't yet exist in energy efficiency at the moment.
In your view, what would be the most effective credit enhancement tools to enhance private lending?
Well, I think we're going to need to use a number of different tools depending upon the sector. My view is at the moment for the residential sector, it's probably going to be some kind of first loss piece which is taken at the public level. I think that's something that we can do in combination with CAFTA. I think in the commercial real estate space, I think on-bill repayment, which I described earlier, I think is quite viable. So I think those are we're going to need to use slightly different techniques for different sectors.
And you may have answered the question earlier, but do you believe that the government has a role to play with regards to helping to leverage, if you will, private equity markets to invest in the energy efficiency world, or is this something that we should just stay out altogether and let the private sector deal with it?
Well, I think the answer is it's not happening in the private sector now without certain amount of government support. And so I think if we wait for that market to develop over time, we may be waiting quite some time. I do think, though, that the amount, I mean, the whole purpose for focusing on energy efficiency finance is because I think we have the ability to leverage public funds in a way that you don't directly. So we can pay subsidies to reduce the cost of a given measure. But I think a way to get more bang for the buck is to use, say, a portion of that to absorb some of the risk associated with the credit, at least in the early years until a credit history is established. And that, I think, once a significant level of risk is covered, then private capital will come on to cover the residual tail, whatever that might be, 90% of the risk from there. My hope would be over time, as these markets develop, that we could actually withdraw the public support in terms of the credit enhancement as we develop a history of performance around these. Again, my feeling is that if you look at the engineering and the economics of upgrades, if they're done properly, the paybacks are really quite dramatic. They have paybacks of between 3 and 7 years.
In comparison to, say, the solar photovoltaic.
Yeah, which have a useful life of 20 years. So that, I mean, I think that in itself, in time, as it becomes more widely accepted, will become an asset class like credit cards, like automobile loans, like mortgages.
Okay, and then just one last question. We'll go down a little from 10,000 feet, a little more to the ground. I know you're an economist and a banker by profession. I'm going to ask you to give me your personal perspective. So it's a sort of open-ended question, perhaps a softball question. Obviously, we know the positive benefits, if you will, of energy efficiency. The current market barriers that exist that are sort of creating the obstacles, if you will, to getting the investments necessary from the private sector into the game itself. Through your perspective, and I know it's not so much your role as a commissioner at the PUC, but the issue of energy efficiency in a state like California with roughly about 2.1 million individuals who are currently unemployed, with one of the highest unemployment rates in the nation in terms of raw numbers. Obviously, we have the largest number of unemployed men and women in the nation, with the top 5 states. Unemployed states combined together. Give me your perspective with regards to if we were to do this right with government and the private sector working in concert with each other to leverage the dollars to create these projects that are non-exportable, if you will, to Singapore, to Dubai, to Mexico, Guangzhou, China. What, through your perspective, is the significance for job creation in California?
Well, I mean, I'm a big supporter of renewables in general, and I think there are positive job attributes to that. But I think the big bang for the buck is in energy efficiency. I mean, to me, this is a triple win. I mean, it's good for the environment, it's good for the customers who have it done, and it's good for the workforce in California. Because the work that's done is, if you think about it, houses are not like automobiles, they're not like manufactured products. Each one of them is highly individual, and so it's not something that you can export the energy efficiency work offshore and have it brought back. I mean, you have to have skilled workers on the ground who understand what they're doing and have the tools here. And so, to me, there have been estimates I've seen that have estimated somewhere in the region of 300,000 man-year or person years that would be generated as a result of the energy efficiency. And I don't know if that number is too high or too low, but I think it would have a significant dent in the unemployment rate, particularly in sectors like construction that has been particularly devastated, where you've got unemployment rates reaching 40%.
That man-person was a quick pivot there.
Yeah,
so that's right.
I'm learning.
I just want to say I've had the opportunity, obviously, to work with you and to meet with you. You come highly experienced. I think you provide a unique voice and unique experience on the PUC Commission, especially with your banking history, real-life experience of the different various products that exist out there, the various innovative tools, and hopefully we can use that and your leadership at the PUC to work in concert to bring this to reality. So I know we're going to have more line of questioning through the pro tem, but I'm just happy and honored to have an opportunity to voice my support for your confirmation.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dutton?
Just a couple of minor questions. Enjoyed our meeting, had a very good conversation. What I was particularly interested in your case is that because of your extensive background as an economist and finance and so forth, is there's been a lot of conversation here in the legislature about doing an economic analysis or some kind of understanding what the cost-benefit rewards are, analysis regarding the effects, the economic effect on rate increases and so forth. I would just appreciate, maybe getting your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, as I said, after safety, my number one concern is around costs. And my concern is very simple. In California, we have energy prices that are 40 to 50% higher than the rest of the country. And I don't have a perfect crystal ball, but I've seen a number of scenarios around future energy prices that suggest that they could rise by another order of magnitude. And I'm very concerned about the impact that that's going to have on the economy overall. I mean, we have already successfully chased out of the state many of the energy-intensive industries into neighboring states, and the impact of higher rates still, I think, is going to be quite a difficult thing to swallow. I mean, one of the issues here, I think, we were going to face in the next few years is who's going to pay for this additional increase. And if you think about it, the pie itself, as it changes shape, still has to be divided between the same groups of people. And I completely understand and support the need to protect low-income people. But at the same time, if they're protected from increases in electricity, that increase is then magnified on the remaining groups. And I do have a concern about the impact that will have on the remaining industrial base within California. I think there's some good news there in that all of these cost increases I'm talking about are not yet baked in. We do have some degrees of freedom if we are aggressive in terms of how we deploy renewables on a distributed basis. That has the potential to actually save a lot of distribution and transmission costs if done properly. And I think energy efficiency. If we can implement energy efficiency measures that reduce the overall demand sufficiently that we don't need to build additional capacity, then that may be a way to help blunt the impact.
I guess one of the areas that bothers me a little bit is because being a property asset manager for most of my professional career, obviously you look at a cost recovery type component when you're taking a look at making capital improvements. And one of my concerns has been sometimes we seem to be we're trying to increase the cost artificially so that we can make the cost recovery numbers look better, okay, for the capital investment. And frankly, that's a condition that's being forced by government regulation and won't necessarily allow us to be that competitive in a true free market system. So I'm just a little concerned about it. That's the reason I'm glad to see somebody with your background on there, because I think sometimes our ambitions to try to get to this other level, I don't think people are fully aware of what it may be costing us at the front end.
Well, I'll say one of the frustrations I've found since joining the commission is very difficult to get hard numbers.
Yeah.
And budget numbers and projections. This goes back to the point that Senator Steinberg was making, which is, we are asked to make a decision on a given project in isolation, and oftentimes without seeing the overall picture. So this project that we might approve, how does that, how many more such projects are there down the line? What are the trade-offs between saying yes to this one, no to that one? Oftentimes they come with the project as a standalone basis, and the transmission costs, which are necessary to bring it to market, are in a separate proceeding. So one of the things that I've been working to do, and I've been working with Commissioner Florio on this, is to develop a dashboard, a set of analyses that will allow us, sitting where we are, to be able to do projections as to where we think the outcomes will be on rates in the future, and what the marginal impact of the decisions that we're looking at will be. And that's not going as quickly as I would like, but hopefully we'll be able to be in a position where we'll know in real time the impact of the decisions that we're making.
Yeah, sometimes we lose track of the fact that we've got all these things, all these programs we want to implement, but then you've got to take a look at the compounding effect of it. And that's where I think has really caused us some problems. As anybody who's ever recently looked at their utility bill, there's a lot of stuff in there. And eventually you do reach a point of saying you can't, you just aren't going to be able to make it work. One other issue, and you and I talked briefly about what's going on in Chino Hills regarding some new towers and so forth. You indicated to me that you kind of concurred with Chairman Peavy and that we need to take a look at that. But you also indicated, I think you said they are actually supposed to resubmit some kind of revised plan or something. Was that the one?
Well, my understanding is that we sent Southern California Edison and representatives of the people of the Chino Hills area to go into discussions around a way to settle. And there are a number of options. The issue, again, to Senator Steinberg's point, the issues are going to be expensive. The transmission line, and they are. I know you've been there. We're talking about 200-foot tall towers in 150-foot wide right-of-way. So the towers are taller than the space in which they occupy, and there's a neighborhood which has grown up around this unused right-of-way. That was the most cost-effective way of bringing the transmission line in. Now to rerun it, either underground or around through other areas, is going to become enormously expensive. And again, a decision that perhaps in retrospect shouldn't have been made or should have been drilled into in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dutton. Senator Fuller?
Thank you. Commissioner, we discussed the RPS contract process in our meeting, and I understand that Senator Steinberg asked you about the RPS contracts. And you already went over the problems with the current RPS contracts approval process at the CPUC, and I thank you for the information you gave me in my office and here today. You mentioned that you are developing changes to this process. When might we expect your proposal to be put out for review?
I wish I could say I knew when that would happen. We're right now in the process of beginning to take evidence from the parties who are involved. And as you can imagine, as I've outlined, these are just my thoughts. These are ideas that I think elements that should be included. But you can imagine that they're quite contentious. And we need to have a full hearing as to why the existing process that we have runs the way it does. Why is it that it seems the market has evolved so that it seems to take between 12 months and 36 months for contracts to come forward. There are probably some very good reasons for that. There are probably some not very good reasons for that. And I think we need to comb through that in terms of developing the proposal. So I don't want to put a timeline on it. I'm trying to move things as quickly as we possibly can. My whole approach on the RPS, SB2 is an enormous change in the existing program. And so what I've tried to do is chop it into phases and pass those that are most commercially relevant as quickly as we possibly can. So we've already had I think 3 decisions. We've got another 3 related to that, which will come in due course. I'm hopeful that this particular decision around procurement will be done in time for the 2012 procurement process, which will happen towards the end of the year. But again, I may find myself being too ambitious.
Well, I look forward to seeing how you progress in cleaning up the line or the queue and eliminate or move to a lesser time-consuming process, non-viable RPS projects. I also was interested in your thoughts on has the CPUC looked into creating a program to assist cooling centers during the real high heat mortality times?
Cooling centers.
Mm-hmm. To assist the cooling centers.
Oh, to assist the cooling centers. I'm not aware of direct programs that are focused on that. I would imagine that within the energy efficiency programs there are programs which are focused on cooling. I think that is an area which has a lot of promise, and there are new cooling technologies that involve different kinds of chillers that. And one of the more interesting projects I've seen is one which uses very, very old technology, which is to use off-peak power during the evening when the wind is blowing in California, and use that to freeze ice. And what that does is once ice is frozen, it takes very little energy to keep it at that temperature. So the notion is that during the evening you use cheap electricity to bring the chillers down to freezing level, and then you only need enough electricity to operate the fans, and you can keep things at a relatively constant temperature. I think those projects have worked on a demonstration basis. They work on, and I'd like to see a lot more emphasis in those types of things.
And on that same line, I know that Mayor Swearingen from Fresno has a proposal that sort of works on this sort of same issue, and how do we work on fixing some of the existing rate disparities. And I know you may or may not be able to talk about it all because I'm not exactly sure where it is in your process, but we have hope that might provide us some relief as well.
Right. Well, let me just. I can't really talk about it because it was just filed. I believe it was on the 1st of March. What I understand of it is it's a proposal that would allow for a discounted rate for electricity rates for companies that are under threat of leaving the state and are in areas of high unemployment. Now, having that kind of discounting program does exist, I believe is about to expire. This would be the first time that we would tie it to an unemployment rate, which I think is an interesting aspect. I'm very sympathetic to companies, particularly in the Central Valley and the food processing area, which rely on cooling for their products. And it makes a lot of sense. I know Mayor Swearingen is thinking very hard about ways to revitalize the Fresno area, and given its proximity to agricultural land, I think moving up the food chain, pardon the pun, is a very good idea. Again, I think I don't want to comment on the specific proposal, but again, there is this issue of how much will this cost. Because to the extent that we offer discounts to electricity for some users, then someone else will need to pick up the cost of that.
And I'm very pleased to hear that the Commission is planning a hearing in the Central Valley this May, so you'll get to hear all these same issues from the locals, who will provide you with direct input, so I won't belabor the subject more, but thank you for coming, and I'm sure they'll take up where I left off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Fuller. Senator Alquist.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. Well, it's a pleasure to see you. I very much enjoyed the discussion with you yesterday, mathematician to mathematician. I think Governor Brown has done an excellent job in choosing someone like you with your background in mathematics, in economics, and in finance. You already answered the question, and we spent a lot of time on it yesterday about your core values, safety, cost, and attracting innovation and new capital, so I'll go on to my second question. What is your philosophy on the relationship and interplay between markets and regulation, and what is the proper role of a regulator?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's our role as regulators to make sure that we assess the impact of the activities of the firms that we regulate, and we look after the public good, in short. I think we have a strange animal here in the state, in that we have a series of large monopoly suppliers of electricity, integrated suppliers of electricity, in various regions. And I think the role of the PUC is doubly important because we don't have effective retail choice and competitive markets in some areas. So I think it's essential that we examine where there are areas that we can introduce new forms of competition, because I do believe that informed consumers in a competitive market will lead to the best outcome. Again, it's important that the consumers are properly informed and that the market is competitive. And I know that that's something which, to some extent, has been tried in California, and I know that there's a lot of scar tissue around that. But I do think that that's an important area that we can continue to press on.
Thank you. You have held positions of being Chief Operating Officer of Global Markets and Vice President of a Risk Management Group. What do you think of regulated utilities? Do you believe those companies should strive for profit maximization, or should they serve a greater public purpose?
Again, another good question. I mean, although these are private companies, I mean, they're in the public utility sector, and I think the public is a key word in that. To me, it's essential that public utilities recognize that they have stakeholders across the board. They have consumers that they need to be concerned about. And as I said, number one, safety has to be at the forefront in the minds of these companies. If you think about it, the electricity and gas companies are dealing with a commodity which is absolutely lethal. Mishandled, it can kill workers, it can kill consumers, can damage property, and so safety has to come above everything, and that doesn't that means that we have to, as the PUC, both ensure that we have carrots and sticks for everyone from the top of the management down to the worker in the field to pursue that as a cause. These companies also have the wider public as stakeholders in addition to their shareholders, and of course they need to be able to earn an adequate rate of return in order to continue to attract the investment capital that we need to invest in the infrastructure.
Thank you. An independent audit by Overland Consulting found that PG&E diverted $100 million for gas safety and operations and used it for other purposes. And gas transmission and storage revenues exceeded the amount needed to earn the authorized rate of return by $430 million. So the question, PG&E has proposed a $2.2 billion pipeline renovation plan. What guiding principles will you utilize as a commissioner to determine what amount ratepayers should pay versus shareholders?
Right. Again, I can't speak specifically to the PG&E case. all of the utilities have got before the commission plans for upgrading their pipe. I mean, I think that the challenging part in all of this is going to be to separate out how much of the expense of these programs is due to deferred maintenance that would have already been paid for by ratepayers, and how much of it is due to the enhanced standards that we are now proposing. At this stage, I haven't yet seen the evidence and made up my mind as to how to go, but I do think it's been very helpful, the passage of SB 879, Senator Padilla's bill on which requires that money that's been authorized by the commission to be spent on safety to be spent on safety or else returned to the ratepayers. Unfortunately, that law wasn't in place at the time in the period we're talking about. So I know there's a legal question as to whether that can be applied retroactively.
Two last points. I have no more questions, but two last quick points. We talked about this briefly. We need you to be vigilant with PG&E on these pipelines. I was up there 2 days after the blast, and it looked like the Martians had landed, and there were just fumes really going up. And we're lucky it wasn't worse than it was. It was very bad. And certainly in Santa Clara County, as well as San Mateo County, there are a lot of old pipelines. I remember having PG in my office for several hours, and we need to be sure that we know what they're talking about, and that there's an accountability measure built in. As an example, when it comes to the L joints, information is as good as the human being that puts it into the computer. So when I hear the computer bungled something, I don't really believe that that's the case. So to be vigilant on that. And then my very last point is that, as a woman, thank you so much for saying per seniors. And I don't know if it's the influence of your three lovely daughters and two lovely daughters. Three lovely daughters, lovely wife, and enlightened son, or if you came up with it on your own. But either way, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I have one more question, then we'll open it up to public testimony. And it's a question that we asked of the prior two commissioners, and it relates to transparency. Apparently, the PUC interprets the law to apply a high degree of secrecy to the public posting of accident investigations. Your chief counsel has been quoted as saying everything is secret unless it is declared otherwise. And when it comes to gas-related explosions, there's only been one instance in the PUC history where the PUC has chosen to make its post-accident reports public. Given, obviously, the San Bruno incident and all of the concern about whether or not this problem is fixed, what about that statute? Do you support it? Do you support that interpretation? Would you aggressively seek to change the law so that the public was more aware of the investigations that the PUC conducts around public safety?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't really understand or appreciate the nuances between the
I'm asking you as a matter
different
of
levels.
As a matter of public policy, do you think that post-accident report should be made public?
As a matter of public policy, I believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant. It's to me, I think having as much information as we possibly can in the public domain can only be a positive thing.
Are you aware of the statute that I referred to?
I'm aware of the statute. I understand that there's efforts in place to allow greater disclosure at the PUC.
Internally, there's discussion internally to interpret that law or the law differently?
As I understand it, within our legal division, we're currently working on a new general, I think it's General Order 66C, which is in process now. I've not actually seen the drafts, but my understanding is that it is going to be allowing safety-related records to be made available to the public.
And for the public and for the committee, what are you doing or what are you going to do to ensure that that proposed order becomes the policy of the commission as soon as possible?
Well, I'm only one of 5 commissioners, and I did.
Very influential one. Some might refer to you as the Anthony Kennedy of the PUC.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, I think it is. I think it is. You're considered the swing vote on a lot of things.
I think it's. I don't think I could be more clear. I believe that we should, as quickly as we can, be as open and as transparent as we can, particularly on public safety issues, but I would say generally across the board. I think in my opinion, as a non-lawyer, without getting into all the other legal niceties, I think that we should operate in as a high degree of transparency as we can, and rather than applying a rule that says, and I'm not sure what General Counsel Lind actually said, but rather than applying that kind of test, which is it's secret unless we say it's not, we should have the reverse, which is it's open unless there's a demonstrative reason for it to be held secret.
I appreciate your answer. I agree with it, and would hope that would be changed in the weeks ahead, and ask you to go to bat there. Thank you. Yeah, Senator De Leon.
I actually have one question. I think Ms. Fuller actually sparked this question. I asked the same question of Commissioners Sandoval and Florio. I know the PUC is Northern Cal, Bay Area, San Francisco centric, and once a year there is a meeting in Southern California, specifically in Los Angeles, which makes it quite challenging, if you will, for folks from other parts of the state of California to participate and have their voices heard, other than perhaps written testimony that's submitted. Give me, are you in support of balancing the number of meetings that you have in San Francisco throughout the state of California, or in particular Southern California, Los Angeles, Northern California?
I think it's a very good point. I hope that the meeting that we're having in Fresno does not exclude a meeting in Southern California.
It's Central Valley. It is not Southern California.
Okay,
yeah,
I know it is. No.
It was a wide net geographically.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I hope going to Fresno does not preclude going to Los Angeles.
Of course.
Personally, I've made it a point to try to get around the state. With all these children, it's a little more difficult. But we did I think successfully. I don't know. You have to ask Tracy. We did decamp to Southern California for 4 weeks.
That is true. That's when we had a phone conversation in Orange County. That's right.
And I spent the time there meeting with people in the area, and I think there is no substitute for being directly on the ground. And I agree. We do tend to be too Northern California centric.
Well, I want to add this, obviously, but the question is would you be supportive of rotating these meetings, whether it's quarterly or monthly, whatever it is, other than this once a year?
I absolutely would. The issue is, of course, expense.
Budget, moving staff. I know that's a challenge, but I think once the economy gets perhaps a little better sometime soon, that this is a real issue that we have to deal with, obviously with the commissioners and with the PUC staff themselves. It's great to live in and around the city. I used to live in the city myself, but a lot of voices are not being heard or participating when geographically they have lack of access to the PUC.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. Witnesses in support of the nominee, please. Coming up again, we have Mr. Torres' mic right there.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I'm Jan Smutney Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Energy Producers Association. We represent non-utility-owned electrical generators, gas, and renewable resources. And I was also asked by Ms. Brownsley to indicate support of the Solar Energy Industries Association. We met Mr. Farron about a year ago in his appointment. We were immediately impressed. He asks very good questions, and he listens well, and then asks more very good questions, and then goes out and fact checks all of that. I think that's obviously he's a very intelligent human being, brings a wealth of, I think, a very important real-world experience to that commission. The Public Utilities Commission this month is 101 years old. It often moves as if it's 101 years old. It has very significant staff resources that it needs, and I think the fact that it takes 18 months to get a contract through, it should take 30 days. I think the commitment that he has made to move this quicker and to transparency is extremely important, and I would encourage you to, in fact, confirm him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones.
Carl Zakella, Natural Resources Defense Council. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think that we've heard from the witness today and the experience of my colleagues in NRDC in recent months that we have an extraordinary individual here with a great life experience, great professional experience, just a great suite of talents. The focus on innovation, for example, is really important to us as we actually progress with how we develop our regulatory systems to help us integrate renewable energy resources, do the energy efficiency we need, and do it at a price that Californians can bear. So we're very excited about this appointment. Look forward to working with them in the future on ways to do that. Thank you.
Thank
we
you very
support.
much.
Vote aye.
Appreciate your testimony. Succinctly, please, everybody.
Mr. Chairman, members, John White with the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies. We support strongly Commissioner Farron's confirmation, and we think that his answers today have revealed the depth that he's bringing, and particularly we like the cooperation that he's engaging in, both with stakeholders as well as other agencies, and also seeing the linkages between and among the various silos at the PUC and breaking down those walls, and ultimately, I think, helping us achieve our goals and saving money, too. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. White.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Whiteycamp. I'm the president of the California Moving and Storage Association. I've submitted some written comments because I'm not really even sure that everyone is aware that we are a regulated industry. Yeah. There's approximately 1,100 movers in the state of California that fall under this regulatory scheme. We support Commissioner Farron, and I want to say that the CPUC currently regulatory scheme imposes strong consumer protections that include consumer notification and guaranteed pricing, as well as validation of a licensed mover that they have insurance in place to protect both the consumer and the public at large. Today, our industry is being assaulted by a large and frequently sophisticated group of unlicensed operators, and they advertise broadly and without fear of reprisal on the internet and create a chaotic environment, failing to provide consumers with any protections.
We're happy to read your letter. We just want to know what you think about his qualifications, Mr. Farron's qualifications.
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of knowledge about his qualifications. I just want him to be aware that we are a regulated industry that's deeply impacted by illegal operators in the state. There's about 1,100 small businesses that have been long-term members of their communities and employers, and they're being impacted by illegal operators that fail to comply with any of the rules and regulations for the state of California.
Didn't think you'd be dealing with the underground economy as a PUC commissioner, but it sounds like that's an issue that the gentleman is bringing to your attention. I hope you'll meet and discuss his concerns further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Yes. Very briefly, I wanted to thank Senator Steinberg and his staff and the Senate Rules Committees for letting me speak in favor of confirmation for Commissioner Farron.
Name, please.
My name is Fred Wallace, and I own a moving company in San Francisco, California. My company has personally moved 4 commissioners at the CPUC, including Susan Kennedy's office, and as you know, she can be one tough customer. I'm also a member of the California Moving and Storage Association, and I am on their Government Affairs Committee. The commissioners and the CPUC regulates the household goods companies throughout California. And I'll just skip to my point here real quick.
Yes, please.
We do support Commissioner Farron. We do absolutely need a person, a director, that will enforce the Max 4 tariff. That's very important to us. That's a very important position that we need. And we also would like, I just want to say this one thing here that's really important, is that we really do need the abatement of illegal movers in California. It has become a real problem with the social media networks nowadays.
And thank you for bringing this to our attention and the Commissioner's attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tony?
Mark Tony, Executive Director of TURN, the Utility Reform Network. Thank you very much for letting me testify in favor of the confirmation of Commissioner Mark Farron. It surprises me, maybe even more than you, that I'd be in support of a banker, but I have to say that Commissioner Farron has really shown himself through the record to be to really take the public interest into account. We very much support him looking at the data, looking at making sure that consumers get the greatest value out of every decision that he makes. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Tony. It's impactful. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Samuel Kang, General Counsel for the Green Line Institute. We represent underserved communities and diverse communities all throughout California, and we steward a coalition, a multi-ethnic coalition of business chambers, community-based organizations, and faith-based groups, including the California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the California Black Chamber, and 3 of the largest African-American churches in the state, as well as others. It is on behalf of these communities that I enthusiastically support the confirmation of Commissioner Farron. And to your point, Senator Steinberg, more specifically, when it comes down to a tie-breaking vote, and it comes down to Commissioner Farron's vote, I've seen 3 things always come up, and that is an incredible intellectual dexterity and business acumen, independent decision-making, and a fierce pragmatism that is rare in government service today. You can bet that whenever he exhibits all 3 of these qualities, which he always does when it comes down to his tie-breaking vote, ratepayers win. I strongly urge our aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon. Delaney Hunter on behalf of a variety of clients, including the California Solar Energy Industries Association, the California Center for Sustainable Energy, Annexco, EDP Renewables, First Solar, K-Road, and O-Power, all strongly in support of the confirmation of Commissioner Farron.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Diane Fellman, here in support of Commissioner Farron's appointment. I also, many of you know us as a solar company, a fossil company. I also want to let the Commissioner know we are the owners of the last regulated heat corporation by the PUC in California.
Interesting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Arthur Halvenstock with Bright Source Energy. As a company that is bringing innovative solar thermal technology to California, driving down costs and increasing value, we very much appreciate Commissioner Farron's fierce intelligence and pragmatism in trying to attain the very same goals that we are trying to deliver to California, making sure that California ratepayers see the very best of the renewables power that we can bring, and making sure that California ratepayers see benefit and reliability for the next many decades. We strongly support Commissioner Farron's confirmation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Brian White with SunEdison. We are a privately held company involved in both distributed generation, utility-scale solar projects, and we do support Commissioner Farron. He's very balanced, pragmatic, and thoughtful. Given all the challenges that they will be dealing with at the Commission, we recognize that he will be one of a key voice to go through some of these issues, and so we support his confirmation. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Senators. Mark Fenstermaker on behalf of Bloom Energy. We fully support Commissioner Farron's confirmation and believe in his view that continued deployment of distributed generation technologies is critical to California's energy reliability, reducing transmission costs, and achieving the state's 33% RPS goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Richard with ARP California. We are really pleased to support Commissioner Farron in his appointment to the PUC. He has shown just tremendous openness. One of the first things he did was hold a stakeholders meeting, which was very welcome and refreshing. Looking forward to working with him on protecting seniors and consumers on utility issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Audra Hartman on behalf of NextEra Energy Resources. We're an owner and developer of wind and solar in the state. We greatly support Commissioner Farron's confirmation. Just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Evan Jacobs on behalf of California Water Association, representing over 120 investor-owned utilities, serving more than 3 million Californians. We also are strongly in support of Commissioner Farron's nomination. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Walker Wright with Sunrun, a leading California solar leasing company. On behalf of our company and other companies involved in similar businesses, we strongly support this appointment right now. We believe that his Commissioner Farron's strong financial background and leadership already demonstrated at the Commission will be essential going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senators, Eduardo Martinez, representing some of the workers in the energy sector, representing the California State Association of Electrical Workers, the California State Pipe Trades Council, the Coalition of California Utility Employees, and the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, all in support of this great nominee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. Reed Addis on behalf of Environmental Defense Fund, and strong support today, not only because of his background, but his leadership on energy efficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Addis. Are there any witnesses in opposition to the nominee? If not, I want to direct my closing comments to your children. You guys should be very proud of your dad, okay? You heard all the people who came up to testify on his behalf. It's not easy to decide to enter the public service where there are a lot of people who ask you hard questions and your decisions are constantly being scrutinized and sometimes criticized. But your dad is absolutely the right person for this job. Smart and obviously accessible, and reasoned in his judgment. And I was only half joking when I talked about the reputation that's already out there that you are considered the swing vote on many different issues. And so your role is, you're co-equal, of course, to your fellow commissioners, but your role is especially important. So hope you guys remember this day and be very proud of your dad. All right? We'll take a motion. Moved by Senator De Leon. Please call the roll.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. De Leon? Aye. De Leon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
I'll go to the floor and be taken up as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Congratulations. All right, we have one gubernatorial appointee not required to appear today, and it's Secretary Carlos Ramos for vote only. And I'd like to make a brief statement about Mr. Ramos' nomination. Following the Rules Committee confirmation hearing for Secretary Ramos on the 1st of February, where the committee, I think, had some concerns about some of his answers, especially around the question of who's in charge here when it comes to information technology, given the state's difficult history on these issues. Since that date, Secretary Ramos has met with our committee staff and submitted additional written responses specifically addressing the concerns raised during the hearing. The responses will be part of the record, but I'd like to just highlight a few excerpts from Secretary Ramos's response. He said, quote, "As the Chief Information Officer, CIO for the state of California, I am accountable for the success and failure of the state's technology portfolio. I am the taxpayer's watchdog on information technology initiatives and projects. It is my responsibility to safeguard the taxpayer's interests when it comes to technology." In addition, he wrote, quote, "I know how technology companies work. I speak their language, and I know how to hold the vendors accountable. I expect to be held accountable." Now, we're going to scrutinize through the budget process the governor's proposal on reorganizing the department. But regardless of the outcome of that deliberation, we want to make sure, and that was the purpose of the hearing last time, to ensure that there is a single point of accountability for ensuring we make sound investments in technology as a state. Given his answers and how he took that responsibility, I'm prepared to support the nomination today. Co-moved. Senator DeLeon and Alquist, please call the roll.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Very good. That's 5-0. That will move to the floor. Very good. Are there any questions on items for any of the members on items 1 or 4 through 7? We're all good? Take a motion from Senator Alquist. Without objection, we'll submit the unanimous, substitute the unanimous roll call. That'll pass on a 5-0 vote. Is there anything else come before the committee? That's it. We'll stand in adjournment. Thank you all very much.